Hey, so I want to give you just a couple of notes of overview for The Handmaid's Tale. So the first thing to note is that Margaret Atwood is a Canadian author, born in 1939. She's worked in several different industries. She was a waitress, a market researcher, film scriptwriter, a cashier, and then she published her first book of poetry in 1961. In 1986, The Handmaid's Tale is published, and the novel is a response to the rise in right wing politicians that were coming to the forefront is as a backlash to the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s. So before the 60s and 70s, the women's movement mostly centered on the vote. And once we got that, like in 1920, 1919, I'm not really sure which one, 1919? Anyway, um, there's kind of like just it ends up being more about the Great Depression after that, because that takes up a lot of energy and space, obviously, for a long time. And then we have World War II, where we get another surge of feminist gains with women going into the workforce as go abroad to fight. In the 50s, we have this kind of a return to traditional values with a lot of um, people kind of trying to do the 2.5 kids, picket fence house thing. Things were returning to normal because, we had won the war, things like that. But a lot of women found themselves kind of unhappy with that role of housewife, um, especially since they were kind of going to school, they had access to higher education, and were bored and frustrated with the repetitive tasks and routines of domesticity. And so, following the success of Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, um, women started to see, like women's organizations started to see that it was possible to change things, to kind of break some of these traditions because it was at that time you needed like your husband, a husband, to do a lot of things, particularly to have a credit card, um, and things like that. So some of the things that are in the Handmaid's Tale are not like just out of Margaret Atwood's fevered imagination. They are um, precedents for this somewhere in society. She's very adamant about the fact that she didn't make up any of it. She just pulled from this society who was doing this thing, pulled from that society that was doing that thing, and just smashed it all together into this Republic of Gilead. So, the National Organization of Women is kind of the at the forefront of the women's movement, um, and agitating for civil rights and equality for women, and kind of trying to campaign against discrimination in the workplace. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1954 also prohibited employers from discriminating on the basis of sex. Title IX of Higher Education of 1972 prohibited discrimination in based on gender in educational institutions. So you have a lot of that. I mean, I think pretty much when you go through orientation at school, you will meet with or at least get the contact details for the Title IX coordinator, and every campus I think might be required to have one. That's like a lawyer that is specifically there to make sure that things remain equitable regarding gender on campus. Um, So, um, in 1972, the first shelter for battered wives and the first rape crisis center were established. And in 1973, we get Roe v. Wade. So, in response to that, people like Jerry Falwell and Phyllis Schlafly were combating those things. They found that, or their position, those two people's position was that the gender roles were eroding and causing a kind of a breakdown in family values, um, and that women didn't need as many freedoms as the National Organization of Women were agitating for. So, in response to that, they tried to block the Equal Rights Amendment that was proposed. And it was proposed in 1923, but it has lacked the ratification of all states that is required for something to actually take effect. Um, so Congress has passed that amendment, but three-fourths of the states need to get on board for it to become a thing, and that hasn't happened as yet. Um, so they were kind of Christian based in their resistance to the ERA and to the other feminist uh, ideals and their campaign. So I think it was Schlafly that said that the ERA would take away the marvelous legal rights of a woman to be a full-time wife and mother in the home supported by her husband. And then that this is a battle against God, is kind of how she positioned this. So, so there's been like I guess a tension that continues even to this day between stay-at-home moms who actually are fulfilled by domesticity and were insulted by the implication that writer Betty Friedan made, that it was mindless and stupid and not fulfilling. A lot of stay-at-home moms or more conservative moms and women uh, didn't feel that the feminist movement included them because of the choices that they were making, that they did not wish to go into the workforce, um, or to avail themselves of any of the things that now and others were um, fighting for. So that tension still exists. Um, I think that there was some support of Falwell and Schlafly's position regarding what happened with the family, that divorce rates are higher and that female-headed households became more prominent. And 60% of women were working outside of the home, and so as a result, there was this idea of a broken home, that kind of thing. And that's when it comes through is in the 70s. But that was their position on how the feminist movement was negatively impacting society. It's like because it's causing more divorces and things like that, and the children are have coming from broken homes. Um, so, it was actually, not until I moved to the South from up north that I realized that there were women who did not, see themselves as feminists, because I thought that just to be a woman is to be a feminist, because obviously you would want to be treated, um, equally, but I see some of the points about conservative women being left out of that movement. So that's interesting. Um, because my feminism is quite simple. I just don't want anybody to be hit by their husband, pretty much, and I want them to be able to send their husband to jail if they hit them. That's my it's pretty simple, pretty simple, but there is a lot more to it for other people than that. Um, so there is a lot of religious fundamentalism in this text. So we look at the Gileadian studies at the end, which is really interesting. That well, it's also a way of Atwood leaving us with some hope that this does not um, subsist, that this way of organizing society is not sustainable, and so it does pass away. Um, so it really just borrows from ideas in our present. So a married woman being referred to by her husband's last name is no different to at least Atwood than the of Fred, of Charles, of Glenn, etc. So this is just kind of an extension of that custom, is what she was suggesting with the of Fred. Is it's no different than um, Mrs. Martin, so to speak. I know even in the maybe in the 90s, 80s, etc. And before it would be Mrs. Jamal Martin. So not even my first name. Now we at least do the first name. But that is something that she wanted to put in there and kind of, just kind of make it a little bit more um, highlighted, put a little bit more emphasis on that. Um, so we have the justification for the use of handmaids from the Bible, when infertile women would give their maids to their husbands, and then any children that came from that union would be raised by the infertile woman. So that is another place um, where she's getting source material. The idea of something being like we see with Janine, her saying that um, her like a gang rape she experienced was her fault. That idea is also a part of culture that um, that we have of blaming the victim, things like that. So, for example, Shafley, who I was talking about earlier, said that virtuous women are seldom accosted by unwelcome sexual propositions or familiarity. Um, so that was her position, and so that's what I guess the Aunt Lydias, etc., were taking on. Just words from a real woman. If you want to know more about this, I think there's a Hulu program right now. Not the Handmaid's Tale itself, that's also very good, but about Shafley and Gloria Steinem and their kind of battle with each other over feminism. And that's played by Kate Blanchett, and I feel like her name is Rose. No, what is her name? I don't remember. But anyway, Kate Blanchett is kind of the big draw to that, and it's about these two women and pretty much everybody who is working toward or against the ERA. So you might uh, take a look at that. So she Atwood is really good at speculative fiction. That's really her thing. She has this. Now there's a sequel called The Testaments, where we hear more from Aunt Lydia and a couple of girls who were raised within the Republic of Gilead, and how the Republic ends up coming into being, and the experience of being raised with no memory of the time before, that kind of thing. So, for some critics, it was disquieting, but not as fantastical as we might wish. That it was startling and well written, etc. One critic said, "I just can't see The intolerance of the far right. Another saying, leading to a super big biblical Puritanism. So, oh yeah, so it's I can't see the intolerance of the far right leading to a super biblical Puritanism, and another one dismissed it as paranoid folklore about what the future may hold for women. So people were split on whether or not they thought that this was an accurate representation of what could happen, but pretty much universally, even when people were disagreeing with the position that she was taking on feminism and on what could happen to women, what critics overall believe is that it was an engaging tale, no matter what. So that's that. You have the Hulu adaptation of it, the Testaments, and the Mad Adam trilogy is in a different world, focused on different issues, but is similarly dystopian. Um, and that is also written by Atwood, which I do recommend. The trilogy starts with Oryx and Crake. So, in any event, that's all I have for you regarding an overview of what's going on with Margaret Atwood and The Handmaid's Tale. Let me know if you have questions, and I'll talk to you soon.